As we're seeing, the title of the presentation today is Development in Welfare in Parent Stock and Commercial Broilers, and as we're saying, it's from a breeder's perspective, a breeder's point of view. First of all, I feel we've got to touch upon and talk about attitudes to welfare. So again, I'm going to cover a large area of stuff, touching upon different areas, and we'll start off by talking about attitudes to welfare, because the things we need to be aware of is that consumers' expectations, and they've changed. We're moving towards where consumers have more influence, but at the same time, there's a greater distance from farming. They want more choice. And some of them are more concerned about the way their food is produced. Okay? That the buying power and the voting power is now sitting with these non-food producers, which are influenced by retail and food service and welfare organisations. So that has an impact. The point you've got to think about is that when they're standing in front of the shelf, when they're making that decision, you have what's effectively the food and goodness box. And welfare is part of that. There's a number of things which sit in there, whether that's being animal welfare, climate change, whether it's lean protein, whether it's local, whether it's reared outdoors, whether it's reared without antibiotics. These things all go there because, again, it's about how does the person feel when they're making that purchasing choice. And we've got to bear that in mind. And we've also got to remember the difference between welfare perception and how the animal looks at welfare and how people look at welfare. Again, in terms of the animal, we've got to remember that that's the welfare that the animal can perceive. Okay? It's a balance in the intrinsic potential of an animal of fitting in with the production environment it's sitting in. And that includes nutrition, housing, health, stockmanship, and social environment. Okay? So that's in terms of the animal. Whereas from people, which is the perspective of the public eye, this is probably going to be different. There are things which has an impact upon how people think about what is good welfare. And this can have an impact depending upon the age of the person, the gender, the religion, the geopolitical part of the world, and the accompanying culture, because how do you look at different parts of the world, look at welfare in different ways, and also past experience with animals. Also, the cuteness of the animal. For example, people care much more about the welfare of a panda than they do about a rat or an insect. Is it a companion animal? Again, the point being is companion animals, we think far more about their welfare than we do necessarily with a farmed animal. An understanding or the interpretation of the farming system and the practices, whether a barn-reared animal compared to open, allowed to roam in the fields. And then finally, and this is an important aspect which we all should be fully aware of, money spent on activism focusing on the species. Some species are targeted more than others, and therefore that's, again, how you have that perception of the welfare. For the animal, again, remember this is talking about people and animals, but the point is that for people, for the animal itself, it's best if there's a 100% match between the welfare it perceives and what society thinks the welfare should be. Because in that point, all the money, the resource, and the efforts is then being aimed at the animal. It's not being aimed at what makes somebody feel good. So that's an important, so welfare is best served when the two meet. And that's an important element to bear in mind. So that's talking about, perception of welfare. Why are we standing here? Why is the thing? We know that the population is increasing. The expectations is that by 2050, the global population will be circa 10 billion people. But at the same time, the resources, the arable land per head of population is decreasing. So at that same point in time, where we have a global population of circa 10 billion, we'll have about 0.2 hectares of arable land per capita. So we have this element that we've got more people and less land for growing food. And equally, as Andrea was mentioned before, we have the fact that meat production, the expectation is that people will be eating more meat. Meat will enter into the diet, whether that's in terms of beef and veal, pork, poultry or sheep, the expectation will increase. Showing here in terms of the numbers from the FAO, which were published last year, and you can see there's between 2022 and 2032, so a 10-year period, there's an expectation globally of a 41 million tonne increase in meat production, with the vast majority of that coming from poultry. The other thing with poultry, when we're looking at that in terms of meat consumption, in terms of incomes and species and GDP, is unlike cattle, sheep and pigs, with poultry we see, regardless of the income, whether it's low, medium or high income, there is an expected increase in terms of consumption of poultry. So poultry, coming back to before, poultry meats all the various areas, all the various bits want to eat poultry. As a consequence of this, there's a lot of parent stock. This slide is trying to give you an idea in terms of the scope of meeting those demands where we are at the moment. So this is 2023 global parent stock for conventional white-feathered chickens. So we've got roughly 600 million parent stock globally, with North America and Europe being similar at about 100 million, Latin America being just slightly higher at about 110, Middle East and Africa slightly lower at about 90, and Asia, Australia, New Zealand being about 200 million. So the point being, there's a lot of chickens out there. And how we fit in as the breeding company is we are sitting at the top of that supply chain. We are spending our time at the top with our pedigree population, looking at genetic improvement and pedigree selection. So again, the point being, what do we do? Our work in terms of trying to improve the birds are in that pedigree population at the top. Moving down from there, from the generations coming further down, that's purely about multiplication. That's about taking that genetics and increasing the numbers. So the point is the genetic progress and health improvements moves down as we, through each of the generations. And we have feedback coming back into that breeding program, into what we're looking at. And the role of the primary breeder is to involve our breeding goals with looking for new trends, looking for new information, and develop technology to target these traits. We're looking at health, welfare and sustainability, and breeding a chicken that gives the best health and welfare and optimal performance. So the point is we're trying there to make the improvement in the birds generation by generation. I should partly now just cover in terms of actually what is selective breeding, how does it work, what are we looking at doing, because it's very simple. It's something which has happened for eons. People have looked to try and improve the animals that they're working and they're farming with. It's the same principle whether we're looking at cattle, we're looking at sheep, we're looking at pigs, or we're looking at chickens. You're looking for the natural variation within the population, and you're selecting the traits that you want to come down into the next generation. What we're trying to do is we're trying to move that curve. So what you're seeing here is basically a normal distribution for any trait. And what we're looking at is trying to move that curve to the right. That year on year, we're making small incremental progress in making changes by picking a small proportion of the population and moving it there. It's all based upon natural variation. So again, we need variation within the population to make those choices, to make those measurements, to move the curve. We're trying to achieve the right selection balance. We're looking and trying to balance in the elements of consumer expectation, society's expectations, and the expectations of the sector. Whether that's in terms of cost, animal health, taste, texture and flavour, the resources which are available, legal regulations. So these are all elements we need to take into consideration. And poultry breeding is about choosing the parents for the future generation. So again, the point is we're choosing the males, we're choosing the females for that next generation. We need to work on and decide what the characteristics to be improved, use measurements that reflect the desired traits effectively. And it's something I'll touch upon again later, which is the fact that we need to be able to be looking and measuring the traits so we know that if we measure it in bird A, it's the same in bird B, it's the same in bird C. So that you have that there. We also need to look at choosing the environment in which the pedigree birds are selected. So again, we have that right balance and we are seeing the genetic potential, because again, what we're looking to try and do is improve the genetic potential of the animals going forward. And we are defining the right balance and selection. What are the traits we're looking for? How much focus are we putting on particular traits versus others? What the genetic team are doing is they're working and anticipating market needs. So they know what we've got and they're trying to look into the future, because if we remember from that pyramid we saw before, from what we do in the breeding program, it's 4 years before it's the broiler on the table. So we're looking in advance and we're doing things to see what's trying to estimate and look and take things forward and guess from there. What we need to do is define the correct selection criteria, and we need to provide continuous, long-term, sustainable progress. Because the point is that progress which comes through genetic selection, it's there forever. It's not that it's there one day and gone the next. As we change the things, it's there, and it builds improvement on improvement on improvement. I mentioned a moment ago about breeding goals. When everybody first started in terms of selective breeding, it was very easy, very minimal stuff. Basically, we picked the chicken which laid the most eggs, and we picked the biggest bird. So it was very simple, and those are very heritable traits, and it's easy to make progress. It's now far more nuanced. It has to be in balance. The point is you need to look at multiple traits, you need to look holistically at the whole picture rather than just in one area. So in terms of where we are, what we have as our balance is that health and welfare traits make up over a third of what we're selecting for. Regardless of the line, is over a third. We're then looking at feed efficiency. Part of the reason for the feed efficiency is because, if nothing else, it's the key driver in both environmental and economic sustainability. Because the point is that as your bird becomes more efficient, you're using less feed. If you're using less feed, it means the impact on resources is reduced. So again, we have there. And as a breeding company, as we had the slide before about parent stock sales, that's what we sell. So therefore, we need to be improving the reproductive fitness. After that, then comes some of the other traits, such as looking in terms of meat yield and meat quality and growth. So if compared to how some of the NGOs would put it, where you talk about fast-growing broilers and it gives the impression that all as a breeding company does is that we're selecting for growth, no, we're not. That's nowhere near the top of our priority. Because the fact is that if the bird doesn't operate, if the bird isn't healthy, what's the win? So we have no interest in unhealthy birds. So that's the reason why health and welfare is the main focus. I'll just put in here a bit about an organisation which I'm also involved in, which is the IPWA, the International Poultry Welfare Alliance, because one of the bits that we're talking from there is about key welfare indicators, and it's about being able to measure things to then improve it. It's exactly what we do within our breeding program. We're looking at key welfare indicators, so it's something that can be measured and you can benchmark and you can improve, because unless you measure it, you're not going to get improvement. So it's a key element there. When we think welfare, you've got to measure something, and you've got to then see how you're doing. So if you're doing that one, we can take it, and you can take levels and improve. In terms of what we're seeing for improvement, so this is showing a genetic trend for the Ross 308 in terms of leg defect freedom. And this is showing in terms of the improvement from 2016 through to now. And we can see that year on year, as I was talking about before, we have that incremental improvement in that trait, which is showing that yes, we're getting that improvement through the selection process. And there's more still to come. So again, it's not that we've reached a plateau, we're still seeing improvements. The fact is that there's more which can come, and we're seeing it there. Now that's looking at it within the pedigree population. If we look down and go, okay, that's nice, but are we seeing it in the field? Are people farming our birds seeing that improvement? Well, this is then publicly available data, which is from Canada, which is looking at into processing plants and in terms of condemnations. And this particular one is looking at Valgus varus. The reason for the red line is in 2008 they changed the criteria. It moved from being Valgus varus to just all leg health issues. And what we can see is we have that drop down through the whole period. So we're seeing that, yes, I'm showing you an improvement from a genetic level, and then we're looking around and seeing, okay, in the field, yes, we're seeing that improvement as well. So breeding companies are making these improvements. The bird of today has better leg health than the bird of yesterday. And that's an important element to be remembering and considering when we look at this. And it's not just legs. So this is again the Canadian data looking at ascites, and the point being we're having a similar decrease. And to the state now that ascites is a rare occurrence within broiler production. So it's the fact that yes, we're measuring stuff, yes, we're seeing improvements, and we're keeping those in because again, okay, we are continually looking and trying to select. So that's in terms of broilers. What are we doing with breeders? So this is just some of the factors which we have when we're looking at our breeder selections. We've got livability, footpad health, age at first egg, henhouse production, rate of lay, persistency of lay, egg weight, storage ability, weight profile, feathering, chick quality, hatchability, persistence of fertility and egg quality. So you can see there's a large range of things that we're looking at and we're measuring. If we take, for example, just simply the henhouse production, this is taking the Ross 708 and where we were in 2007. So in 2007, we were saying that with the Ross 308 at that point would be laying cumulatively 165 eggs in a 40-week period. Okay? Move forward to 2021. We've got an improvement of 5 eggs with the same bird. So we've moved from 163 to 170. And that's the simple bit in terms of that continuous improvement, continuous looking and selection. But this is coming back the way, as I said at the start, this is since the 1950s we've been doing this element. This is the bread and butter to the genetic side of things, what we're looking for and improving at all times. We'll take another element, which is feathering. So for feathering, we're looking at 2 different points of time in the bird's life where we're looking and making these measurements, at the broiler and also at the breeder. And the point is we have this focus, this balance where we're looking at these traits, because the point is that why these 2 ages? Simple one, fewer scratches at processing and condemnation of broilers. Fine. Equally, in terms of lower levels of mating damage in breeders. So the point is we're looking at multiple areas on the bird for the feathering. What's the feathering looking like? So again, we're looking for that improvement, that continuous change to get better. Another one is egg quality. So we've got multiple areas in here. So again, we have egg quality as the trait, but you can see we have a lot of areas where we're measuring when we're talking about egg quality. Because egg quality traits to improve chick quality. Because again, at the end of the day, we need a healthy day-old chick to be doing that. And we expect promoting a good environment for developing the embryo. So we're measuring specific gravity, egg weight loss, and egg size. We're also looking at new traits, other things to bring in, such as egg shape. And simply what we're doing there is ensuring that eggs look egg shape. Because again, it's the fact of making sure that we don't have the potential of them being put in trays the wrong way around. which clearly has an impact. Another trait which we're investigating and starting to bring in is cuticle cover, because we know that the cuticle basically helps in terms of regulation of air exchange within the egg, and also it's that first line of defense. So let's bring that. So we're bringing in, looking at that as coming in, as being a trait to bring in. We also use genomics. So this is the bit which is touched upon. And it's just about adding more data in. So looking at that genetic level as well as at a phenotypic level brings additional benefits. What it allows us to do within our breeding programs is that historically we'd have the male with 10 hens. So you would have one male with 10 hens, so there is no competition for breeding. That male is always going to mate because it's not got to do anything special. What we can do with genomics is we can do what's called parental assignment. We can let everything run together and then find out who the parents are afterwards. The point with that is it allows us to run them as big groups rather than just being 10 birds at a time. So we actually get that social interaction, and also that potential competition with the male with other males to do the mating. And that gives us overall a better breeder male. The other point it does is it allows us to look at the social network in terms of the chicks. So what we're showing on the slide at the moment is that big blue dot is the male. And those little pink dots, they're the hens that it's mated with. Okay? And what's interesting is not only do we have in terms of one male with multiple hens, what we find when we have the larger pens is that males mate with multiple hens and hens mate with multiple males. So again, we can see what those interactions are, and we can, to understand what drives these interactions, hopefully can help us better understand and improve population fertility. So this is part of the stuff and the elements which come from at a genomic level. We can then look at behaviours. We can then hopefully start to understand what those behaviours are leading to, and we can move elements in there. In terms of so that's parental assignment. The other element within genomics is genomic selection. So in the top line that's what we've always historically done. We have our pedigree. We then look at stuff and we measure the bird all the way through its life, which gives us predictors, which helps us with our accuracy of choosing the right bird. Because remember, coming back to the point is, what we're looking to do is choose who will be the parents for the next generation. And so therefore, we've got with the first one, we're measuring the individual animal at various stages in its life. That gives us clues, that gives us indicators. But it doesn't give the complete story. The point with the genomics, and all we need for the genomics is a simple blood test, a blood sample. We can then look at the DNA, and that brings that extra level of data, that extra level of information, which means that we can then combine that sources of information to give us better accuracy. We have more information to help in terms of making those selections. Because the thing I'll tell you is I've yet to meet a geneticist who says, can I have less data, please? The more, the better. Can we measure this? Can we measure this as well? So again, the point is that genomic selection does not mean that we stop doing phenotypic selection. No, we're doing it as well, because it adds to the information rather than replaces it. And that higher selection actually gives us more genetic progress. So in terms of the broiler traits, with feed efficiency, meat quality, leg health and robustness, we will see an improvement of 15 to 30%. However, with the breeder traits, which we're getting a far higher improvement, far more benefit there, because again, we can make choices about the bird before, whereas previously with the breeder, we were making choices based upon brothers, sisters, aunts and uncles, as it were. We're now making selection because we know what the genetic makeup of that bird is, rather than how relatives have performed. So again, it helps and improve in terms of the accuracy going forward. The other thing I'd like to just point out, I'm standing here as a breeding company, from the breeding company, it's not all about genetics. So one of the things which we regularly find is that everything's our fault. No, it's not. Yes, we're responsible for the bird that you're working with and the elements there, but it's not all about genetics. As I've touched upon, the birds are constantly changing. You know, genetic improvement brings change, and the birds are constantly changing. We as a breeding company, we provide information and advice on how to manage the birds. So it's a part of what we do, as well as not just the fact of, yes, we select these birds, we also need to give help and advice in terms of how to manage them. So our advice needs to adapt as the birds change. So again, what we said 10 years ago might not necessarily apply to now. And so that's part of the reason why we're committed in terms of how Avigen as a business operates. We have 5 commitments, top 5 commitments in terms of how we move things forward. And one of them is about the importance of management and stockmanship and that passing of information of how do you manage those birds. So we work hard in hand with our customers, sharing the latest and best management practices to get the best from their birds, because again, we pass them on. Because management and stockmanship is about 70 to 90% of bird health, performance, welfare and sustainability. And that's because the amount in genetic traits and the heritability in certain traits, we're only talking about 10 to 30% in some of these traits. So therefore the rest is sitting in with management. And the element in there is, so we've got to help in terms of that. And so what can that look like? So this is a study which was done in the Netherlands looking at welfare scoring in different systems. So there's 3 systems in place. There's what's called the Dutch retail, which was a bird which grew about 50 grams a day with certain environmental benefits. We've got the conventional, which in the terms of this particular trial was a Ross 308. And we have the Betterleven, which is a slower growing bird, which has additional environmental enrichments, normally within the growing system. So it's a lower stocking density and additional elements in there. And this study which was carried out was looking at, okay, a welfare score which was based both upon the bird itself, so welfare outcomes scoring on the bird, and also in terms of the resource-based measures. So what we have is the fact that as we move from the conventional to the Dutch retail to the Betterleven, the amount of resource-based measures increases, so the score increases. So if we look at the left, we've got 3 distinct populations, 3 distinct curves in terms of what we're seeing. If you remove those resource-based and you're just looking at outcome-based, which again is essentially the management of the bird, okay? So it's not what's gone in, it's how the birds are being managed. We have a far closer group and we have distinct overlap. So in other words, it's showing there that people within there were able to manage a Ross 308, which is the fast-growing bird, as well as some of the slow-growing birds. And equally, some of the slow-growing, it's possible to grow a slow-growing bird as badly as some of the conventional birds. Okay, so management is key. Doesn't matter about the system, how you manage the bird is important. And that's the thing to bear in mind. And that again comes back to that idea about why you need to measure, you need to look at your outcome measurements and measure them, and then you can benchmark and see how you are doing against what you've done before to improve your welfare. So one of the elements which we have, and we, as I said, we touched upon in one of the bits before, that we need to think about is regulation and elements like that. So within Europe, last year we had EFSA, who's the European Food Safety Authority, produced a report which was giving the on scientific opinion on the welfare of broilers, which included both broilers and breeders. And here's some of the key recommendations which came out of that. Now the point I was just going to pick up upon and just take a little bit further is feed restriction. And the fact that their recommendation was that feed restriction in broiler breeders should be avoided. Okay? So we then got to look, so again, that's not genetics, that's management. So we need to take that further and go, okay, what do we need to do? So thinking about a broiler and growth, Similar for all living things. In the youth, they're fast growing. Puberty and adulthood slow down intake and growth, and adult life, fixed wave or very slow growth. In terms with broilers, they're always growing. Broiler breeders are always growing, they're always putting on weight. You've got to balance between ad lib, which again, in terms of what we have in some of the work which has been put forward is that birds should be ad lib fed. The problem with that is there's issues in terms of going forward with multiple ovulation, disease mortality, and too much fat going on. Equally, if you underfeed them, birds are anorexic, also disease mortality, and potentially too little fat. As I said, broiler breeders grow during their whole life because it's required for optimal health and welfare, and they need to build and maintain a good support system in terms of strong legs and skeleton. We talked about improvements in leg health. So again, they need to put that down. Reproductive fitness. We have that one is that they get fed too much, they're too heavy, their productivity drops down. So we need that one. Equally, we need balanced behaviour, and we need healthy heart, lung, gut, and immune system. So again, we need to ensure that they're meeting the requirements of the bird going forward. Equally, they've got to have body fat. But it's got to be the right amount of body fat. They need body fat for reproductive fitness, for that physiological balance. If they're too lean, reproduction goes down and disease and mortality increases. But equally, if they're too fat, reproduction goes down and disease and mortality increases. So again, it's a balance. You need to ensure that you hit the right amount. It's key. In terms of looking in and around this element and this part of the world, recent findings have looked at nutrient and management policies such as dietary dilution, which increase feed volumes, more energy, less protein to support sufficient body fat, specific growth curves during rear, scattering feed in the litter to encourage foraging, environmental enrichment. And all these elements contribute to balanced growth, health and behaviour, such as foraging, eating characteristics, digestibility, and that overall activity. The one thing I'll say is that evidence and interpretation vary on these. So again, we have the trials, we have the stuff, people's interpretation on the roles vary. But the overall point is we need more work. We talk about broilers, and we spend a lot of time talking about broilers. We don't talk about breeders. And remember that every broiler comes from a breeder. So that's why we need to look at it. We need to have that work being done and to be carried out. And I'll touch upon one of the elements which was there. So this is an area of work that we've been involved in and we're looking at. And it's just in this first instance just saying some of the areas of why we've looked at it. I'm not covering any results from it because Rick Van Amos, who is in the audience, is probably going to be talking about it tomorrow. So this is just the setup for it. What do we know about diluted rearing diets? We know that it takes a longer cleanup time. We know we get calmer birds with diluted diets. We have improved feathering, we have higher livability, and we have improved litter quality and increased litter volume. And we have more water during light hours. So again, the birds are drinking more. In this work we were looking at, we use straw pellets. So again, what we're seeing here in the image is we've got the straw pellets themselves, the feed without it, and then using what this feed looks like when we've introduced straw pellets as part of that ration. And what's new and what's different with the straw pellets is basically from a nutritional perspective, they're effectively neutral. So again, they don't have an impact upon the standard formulation. It's the fact that you are diluting that ration without necessarily having an impact beyond that. What's new is that straw pellets have a higher water holding capacity, which again potentially means that when we're looking at gut fill and things along those lines, that we have potential additional benefits in there. That early introduction with dilution could help with imprinting. As I said, there's no energy value, so the formulation stay pretty much the same. It's just the fact that you've introduced these straw. And we've been looking ourselves in terms of within field, in other areas, with our breeders, rather than necessarily at parent stock level. Trials looking at a similar thing, which is all tied in. So it's good stuff. The key thing to remember is that with the diluted diets, you need to think about your water to feed ratio. As we talked about, there's an increased water holding capacity. So the one on the left is looking at 50 grams of feed with a water to feed ratio of 1.8. And we can see that the control feed looks a nice watery combination, whereas the diluted feed looks a bit stodgy. So again, it's the potential of constipation. Whereas if you increase your water to feed ratio to 2.5, which is the image on your right, we can see that, yep, that diluted feed now looks like that control feed at 1.5. So again, it allows birds more access to water, so which again is one of those things that it helps overall in terms of the behaviour with the birds throughout the day. And the success is multifactorial. With the feed dilution, as I said, increased feed volumes and longer feeds and longer clean-up times. So again, the bird is spending more time feeding than it does normally. That we have an imprinting, because the higher feed volume and frequency of meals should reduce stress. And that particle size dilution supports gusset development and regulates feed flow. And that the water holding capacity improves cetacean and ad lib water, which is a positive, which helps in terms of behavioural changes. So it's an area which is important. It's an area certainly within the European sphere we need to be looking at, we need to be developing on, and it will come to other parts of the world. How do we, coming back as I was saying before, how do we feed the bird is an important element. But just to summarise up, in terms of the breeding company, we look for and try and approach a steady and careful balanced selection, which gives us better welfare outcomes together with productivity and sustainability. And it's something we've achieved for decades. It's our approach that we've done for decades, which is looking at improving welfare traits at the same time as improving these performance traits, so that the two are hand in hand. This idea, this concept that you can't select for the two together is wrong. We can improve both, and it is what we're doing. And then just finally, in terms of our work for now and in the future, we as primary breeders cater for a diversifying world broiler market. We have multiple birds, multiple options to supply the bird to the people that they need. We have broadened selection goals which are focused on health, welfare and sustainability. We have a continued investment in new technology, which is crucial to target increasingly complex traits. And then finally, advancing and sharing knowledge on the best management practices with our birds. With that, I'd like to thank you very much and open to any questions.